Good afternoon, everybody. James Boviwa. We'll get started here in just a moment, but wanted to thank everybody for all of the good wishes from last week. And I also wanted to extend my own heartfelt thoughts and good wishes to everybody who may be struggling with health issues, and really appreciate everybody's service on this call and on this council. If you'll forgive me, I will not be able to join via video today due to bandwidth issues. And without further ado, I am James Boviwa and the chair of the New Mexico Sustainable Economy Advisory Council. I call to order this July rescheduled meeting of the council, and I will now take roll of the committee. Daisy Maldonado. Patricia Maniton. Glenn Schiffbauer is excused. Rob Black.
Here.
Thank you. Cassie Arias. Marissa Naranjo. Jonathan Perry.
I'm here.
Thank you. Mayani Barudin.
I'm here.
Thank you. Aksa Chavez.
Here, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. JT Willie. Wendy Atsity.
Here.
Thank you. Janine Yazi. Joe Little. Joe, I see. Okay, there you are.
Yeah, I'm present.
Thank you, sir. Okay, well, we will proceed into our agenda, which all of you had received prior to the meeting. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting.
Jonathan Perry motions to approve.
Joe
Second.
Little seconds. Yeah.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Minutes from our May meeting. We did not meet in June, but there are May meeting minutes that have not been provided to the committee. So the chair will entertain a motion to postpone approval of May meeting minutes until our next regularly scheduled August meeting.
This is Rob Black, so moved.
Thank you, Rob. Do you have a second?
It's Joe Little second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Great, thank you all. So I think we have some really exciting presentations today. And one in particular to begin with will be a review and discussion of recommendations provided by Hatch Forum LLC. Our consultants, who you all will remember, were hired by New Mexico Economic Development Department earlier this year to provide recommendations to Set Force and our committee. And so I'd like to invite Sean O'Shea from Hatch Forum LLC to review those recommendations. As I mentioned in an email to the committee, there will be time over the next couple of weeks, now in August, to fully review the very extensive recommendations that were provided by Sean and his team. So please do not despair. The 100 pages of document that you received, you do not need to have reviewed completely. There is time to continue to provide input. So Sean, why don't you take it away?
Yes, thanks, James. Whomever's the lead, could you allow me to share my screen?
Thank you, Felicia. Are you able to do that for Sean or Wesley?
Trying to figure it out. Let me see.
If you just go down to the share screen button on the bottom and then enable everybody to share their screen.
Joanna, do you have access to that? I'm not seeing that.
I don't. It said that you were the host.
Oh, man.
You could also make Sean a co-host under the participants list, and that would allow him to do it.
There we go, Sean. You should be able to do it since you're the
All right.
host now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hey, so yeah, as James said, it was a long document, and I know that everyone probably just laid eyes on it for the first time yesterday. So we'll try and go through it pretty quickly. This is a similar presentation that I gave to staff at NMEDD kind of a few days after it was submitted. And there's some revisions based on feedback from them for how best to kind of relay the information that's in there. But hopefully this as a kind of compendium to the document itself can help weed through and find the information that's relevant at the specific points in time when you'll need to access it. So the deliverable outlines sort of a three-stage approach to the implementation, and creating this iterative approach to it, so that once you're finished with one, you go back and start again, or you can do that kind of in the middle too. So it's really testing all of the work that's been done, all of the assumptions about what the outcomes are going to be, what the actions are, how we're going to get at those outcomes, how we're going to measure whether or not we're achieving those outcomes, and then who needs to know that we are getting closer and closer incrementally to those achievements. And the assessment piece is just that. It's assessing where we are and what's been done, and who's doing what. And then in the alignment, it's bringing all that information together to make sure that NMEDD, SEAC, and SETForce, and then all of the community partners that are involved in implementation and action efforts are all on the same page moving forward. And then action is putting all of that into action, is getting the work done on the ground, getting the work done on a policy front from SETForce and some input from SEAC, engaging and activating the legislature, and then just really making sure that we're starting to work on all of these things and get stuff done. And then we come back to the assessment point after that, like what has been done, how is it going, what's working, what's not working, what can we throw out, what do we need to redo or re-examine or take another look at. And in the document itself, there's this is prettier, but NMEDD pointed out that it wasn't necessarily as it didn't provide as much explanation as maybe it should. So this is just an outline for each of these stages, corresponding with the current fiscal year, what these different bodies are doing. And then SEAC obviously is highlighted in the middle there. So during the assessment period, and this is actually taking place right now. So NMEDD, Felicia and Joanna are actively working on going out and talking to various departments and various stakeholders to see what progress is being made, or how are the different priorities and recommendations, as they're called in the strategic plan, but actions as they'll probably be more commonly referred to from now on, how those are being accomplished, or what where we stand.
Yeah, Sean, thank you for that. And I just want to mention here again that these are recommendations, and both NMEDD and SEAC and Set Force, we are seeking comments, feedback from committee members of SEAC.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, James. Yeah. So in this one, the proposed kind of actions for SEAC during this assessment period is to just take an active part in reviewing the priorities and action items as they exist in the strategic plan right now. Connect with community contacts, people that you may be familiar with, people from your community or that are close to your organization, to determine and see if there are any efforts that they're doing that correspond with the actions and priorities that currently exist within the plan. And then just report that information to NMEDD as they conduct their assessments. NMEDD will create these report cards, which we'll get into a little bit later, based on the assessment information, and then SEAC will just recommended to review those report cards and kind of see where everything stands. And Set Force is recommended to do the same thing so that everybody knows where things stand moving forward. And then as was, I think the last meeting probably was the one where we did that little exercise, just getting feedback and comments from everybody about what you'd like to see SEAC do. And one of the things was forming working groups and kind of digging in a little deeper on some of these priorities and actions. So it would be to form those working groups based on the priorities, with a focus on in the plan, strategy 4, which is inclusive New Mexico, and then strategy 6, which is resilient New Mexico. And that encompasses all of the different target industries that the state lays out. 9 in the plan, which has been updated to 10 now, including uranium mine reclamation. And then this is the alignment period. So this is the period where everyone takes the information that's been gathered and collected, synthesized and analyzed, and tries to get on the same page moving forward. So how are we all gonna, with a common goal and common purpose, move forward and start to implement some of the things that are contained within this plan, or update it as we move further along in the process. So the working groups review existing priority drafts, and a good chunk of that deliverable are the priority drafts, which are a reimagining of how the existing state strategic plan outlines and represents the priorities and the recommendations or actions. And then drafting equity principles. And so there's a section in the deliverable about what equity principles look like, a sample equity principle that maybe SEAC could work off of if they want to do that. And then this is also, a big part is this develop and implement your community engagement strategy. Looking at specifically communities that were not represented in the initial strategic planning work, who weren't consulted or talked to or notified or had any kind of outreach efforts directed towards them. Secondly, communities that are most impacted by the actions and outcomes of the work. So these priorities and these action items, in what communities or what parts of the state are going to be most affected by, or do we need the most buy-in from in order to really start to implement these? And then the communities and organizations who will be asked to implement portions of the work. So other EDOs or community organizations throughout the state that maybe will be asked to include portions of these actions or these priorities within their own planning activities or their own kind of work plans. And then updating the priority drafts and creating final FY23 or 24, 25 as we move on. based on the feedback during the engagement process. And so updating and all of the sections of the priority drafts based on the feedback from the community engagement and outreach. And then finally, the action portion is continuing the engagements. That's sort of an ongoing process for feedbacks and recommendations from target communities on the implementation efforts. How is it going, right? We're in the action stage right now. So what do you need to get started? How is the work going? How can we support it or help you or provide you with resources to keep going, keep chugging along? In the working groups that were formed earlier, how can we assist people working on the ground with some policy recommendations that we can bring to the legislature or start to lobby members of the legislature? Work with communities and organizations to create new action items, right? Or incorporate existing action items into priorities if implementation stalls or can't be started. So this is going to be the point in time where we're going to know, or you're going to know whether something works or not. If it doesn't get started, or there's not the capacity to do it on the ground, or just for 1,000 different reasons it doesn't work, how can we maintain that outcome? Because we want to make the change, but how do we switch around the actions or recommend different things to do on the ground in order to get at those outcomes in a more efficient or productive way? We want to ensure the equity principles are put into practice, really hold NMEDD and set force accountable and provide them with guidance as they're starting to develop their own programming and their own ways of implementation, making sure that those are actually put into practice as opposed to just being static. And then support the economic development department in the collection of metrics, especially in the target communities that were part of the engagement process. So, part of that engagement in the very beginning is going to be, we want to learn and know how best to do this and what would work best, but we also want to know how can you best report back results that you're seeing so that we can, best collect them and use them in our own analysis. So the next part is just to dive a little bit deeper into the actual content of the deliverable. And so in the assessment section, we have the priority drafts, which are used in all the different stages. We have assessment surveys and then the report card framework. Assessment surveys are not specifically outlined in the deliverable, but they were part of the work that was done, and they're the basis for, that was the basis for what the assessment surveying process looks like right now, which is a little bit different than it was in the beginning. And this is a terrible picture, but hard to see. But so again, these priority drafts are a reimagining of the way in which strategies and priorities and actions and metrics fit with each other from the strategic plan in one easily referenced place. So every priority that's listed in the plan has one of these priority drafts that's included in the deliverable. The only one that was created specifically for the deliverable was priority 10 in strategy 6, which was the addition of the uranium mine reclamation as a target industry for NMEDD. And so the outcomes are new because we want to make sure that there's a reason why we're prioritizing these things. And the reason why we're doing that is to achieve these outcomes. And the outcome is the overall benefit that the state hopes to achieve through its priorities. Like, we're doing this because we want to see this happen. The measure is, how are we going to get at seeing whether or not that outcome is being achieved? The method is, what are the methods that we're going to use to collect those measurements? And then the communication is, who needs to know that we are doing this and getting closer and closer to achieving these outcomes? And then there's time, lead, budget, and partners, right? And so all of those things, with the exception of outcomes and communication, come directly from the plan. The outcomes and communication were put in by Hatchform really as placeholders. so that as you're going through and reviewing them, there's something there, but it's definitely meant to be changed and worked on and, reworked, all that stuff. And then these are the report cards, and this is the framework that NMEDD will use after they finish collecting all of the assessment information that they do themselves and is also fed to them by the work that SEAC does and the work that SetForce does. How are they going to report that information back out again so that we know of these action items that are listed in the priority drafts, of the actions recommendations that are listed in the state strategic plan? How are we doing on the actual work? How far have we gotten? How far have different organizations gotten? Even it was very interesting, even in the short time when we were working on it and did assessment surveys with some staff, there were some things that had already really been completed or that were very close to being completed that maybe wouldn't have been realized until much later in the process because just no one asked. And then now the assessment is really just going out and asking people, how are you doing on this? Has this been started yet? Are we close? Are you not doing it at all because it's ridiculous and like there's no way you can make it happen and it won't ever work? Well, in that case, let's go back and try and think of something different because we still want to achieve those outcomes, but that way of doing it, the action that we're going to put in place in order to achieve those outcomes is just not going to work. I'll move along. I know I'm getting close on time here. During the alignment, there's some things in the deliverable that go along with this stage. These are the SEAC protocols, meeting protocols, the equity framework, the outline for how to develop an equity framework, and then community engagement. So the protocols, and these are the pages where they're located in the deliverable, so you can flip through and just access it pretty quickly. So the protocols, there's a little bit of information on the Open Meetings Act. There's a sample meeting protocol for review by the chair. And there's an overview of the process to update the plan. And so all of these can be reviewed by SEAC, edited, and then, voted on and put into practice in the next few meetings. The same with the equity framework. There is draft guiding principles for review by the chair and the SEAC committee. And then there's a draft worksheet for review by the chair and the committee. So as opposed to just saying, while that's in there, but instead of just saying, here's how you develop equity principles, we thought it was important to actually have some equity principles as a starting point that kind of combine some best practices and then stuff from the climate equity principles. And then there's a draft worksheet for how do you develop actions or programs or initiatives based on these principles. And then community engagement, and this was done by CCP, and this has goals, outcomes, and main targets. It has actions by stage, so by the assessment, alignment, and action stage, and then it has some outreach targets. And on this one, probably also with SEAC, just more work aligning that engagement plan with the implementation strategies, with the actions, as those get a little more set in stone. And then finally, action. So how do we update and edit the plan moving forward? How do we encourage and engage with community implementation? How do we collect and display metrics? And then again, the community engagement for this part, how do we check in and make sure that the communities, regions, organizations are being supported in the implementation of the action items. So this is updates and editing. There's a whole process listed there that can be reviewed and voted on and incorporated into your workflow for how you would update these priority drafts and update what the overall kind of strategic direction is going to be. And those go by, again, the stages. So in assessment, alignment, and action. There's also community implementation. So This is a little bit more on the NMEDD side, but definitely when SEAC is engaging in the community outreach and talking with community leaders and organizations about how will this get implemented, this pertains to that too. And it's really about how do we get these actions and these outcomes to be incorporated into planning activity or into the workflow or work plans of these organizations and communities moving forward. And there's various ways to kind of incentivize that and then to check in on progress for how it's moving forward. And then metrics. So the big recommendation here was to just find and contract. There's some recommendations in the plan for a couple companies that do this, but develop a dashboard for the site that can, one, take a lot off of sort of NMEDD and everybody else's plate by having an API that will just draw in numbers if they're from like a publicly available database, like the census or the Bureau of Labor Statistics or one of those. So how do we pull those on and display them so that we don't really have to worry about it or think about it once that's already set up? But then for the primary data, what makes the most sense for how do we collect that and what's the best way to display it? And there are, a few companies that do this really well. And the contact information and stuff for those are in the deliverable. It's also worth looking at all of the measures and methods that are in the priority drafts. A lot of those were taken right from the strategic plan. Some of them, don't really make a whole lot of sense, honestly. When we look at, is this a way to measure an outcome as opposed to just a way of measuring an output? Like, yeah, we completed a plan, or yes, we, stood up this building. So all of those would really need to be reviewed. The only thing that we added on our own were some ones where there was really nothing there. So we wanted to have something there just as a placeholder so that there could be a reference point. And then also in the last strategy where we look at the target industries, there's a metric there to look at that actually we were advised on by Tom and his crew about how do we look at the way the state is incentivizing various industries and the money that's going through these economic development incentives, and do they correspond with these target industries? So those are in there. But there's more work to be done. And again, it's an iterative process. So like they're not set in stone. So it's worth going back and revisiting them every year until this sort of 5-year initial implementation period is over with. And so that is the end. It's kind of a crash into the deliverable. But I'm happy to answer questions now if anybody has any, but also please feel free to shoot me an email if you want to dig into it a little bit deeper or have a specific question about something after you've had a chance to look it through. But thanks, James, for inviting me to take part in this, and really excited to see where the
absolutely. Thank you, Sean. Rob.
Thank you, James. Sean, I'm just curious as to how did you get, or why did we put uranium mine reclamation on the list?
Oh, that was in the legislation.
That was from the legislation?
Yeah, that uranium mine and mill reclamation be one of the target industries.
Okay. Okay, so then it would need to be a whole build out of kind of one of those pieces. And I guess, the reason I'm asking is I can think of a lot of other industries that are going to create a lot more jobs than that. And I'm just curious that's why I was curious as to why that became a priority. But if it's in the legislation, I guess that's what we do. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, we didn't just pull that one out. That was part of the RFP, and it was in the legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and not the legislation that created set force and SEAC, but additional legislation, which, Sean, if you have that in front of you, put it in the chat, please.
I don't have it in front of me, but I can find it and send it to you guys for reference.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the clarification, James. I wasn't aware that there was additional piece of legislation.
Yeah, no, good questions to be asked. Additional questions from other committee members? So we do have CCP on, oh, Patricia, go for it. If you're
I think
able,
she shared in the chat, James.
yes. Okay.
She said regarding community outreach that SEAC members may do, is there a deck or talking point document that NMEDD is using or may use for consistent messaging?
Well, I think that's a good question for EDD.
Hi, James. This is Joanna from EDD, and hi all. Thanks for the question, Patricia. We don't have one at this point, but as Sean alluded to and James brought up earlier, we're just in the beginning phases of being able to review his recommendations and present this to set forth so we can get a game plan together. And that is definitely something that we will develop. Thanks for the question. It's a really great point.
Thanks, Joanna. Any other questions? I do see that we have some folks from CCP on, well, here in the meeting present, and wanted to invite you all, if you would like to speak to some of your community recommendations, but also don't feel that you need to, as I am sort of putting you on the spot.
Hi, Chairman, hello, committee. I can maybe lead off a little bit and give you an overview of some of the elements that we're thinking about in terms of community engagement. So my name is Michael Leon Guerrero. I'm the Sustainable Economy Policy Advisor for Center for Civic Policy. And as you know, we were contracted to develop a community engagement plan. So the members of our team who worked on putting that together are joining for the most part. And so there are a few elements that we're looking at, and one relates to the question that was just raised in terms of materials. But we are actually looking at launching on August 16th a process. Now, we're still waiting to hear back, and that's a question that we had on approval for the plan that we submitted and the budget for it. So we're basically waiting on that to start moving forward on most of the elements of the plan. But these are some of the areas that we're looking at. So first, we're looking at doing a series of online webinars, 4 of them beginning in mid-August. So we're looking at August 16th to be able to start that off, where basically we just give an overview of the process. So to familiarize people who have been engaged in like the workforce development study, but also folks in the general public who aren't aware of the set force and the SEAC process at this point. So we want to be able to give that kind of basic overview. Also, we're looking at doing some community meetings, regional meetings around the state. And we're partnering with the Power for New Mexico Coalition, which is for 5 community organizations around the state. A few of them have already said that they'd be willing to host a meeting in some part of the state to get input on the strategic plan as well. We've also got a communications plan that we're looking to implement. So along with the webinars that we're thinking of doing, we're going to be linking up with our own website on Power for New Mexico, which we're upgrading to include a page about set force and the advisory committee. And of course, we want to link to whatever information you feel is important for us to connect folks to as well. Some of the questions that we do have are around just how the public can provide input and where that gets housed. Is there going to be some kind of an online vehicle where folks can do that? Is that something that we're being asked to put together? So there's just some details that we'd like to get sorted out with you all. And then, of course, we're going to be doing social media and just kind of promoting this whole project because we feel it's really important, obviously, that since we're talking about the state's economy, that as many people as possible in New Mexico get engaged in the process. So that is a quick overview. I know Jesse, Molly, Nena, Oriana, those are folks on our team. If you have any questions, and also we were looking at putting together some one-pagers about the process as well. So we'd like to coordinate with you all on that if that's already in the works. But I'll open it up if folks from our team have anything they want to add.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate the overview and really excited to have your recommendations in front of us. One last call for any questions from committee members or EDD staff.
James, this is Rob.
Yes, go for it.
Thank you. Michael, thanks for being here. I apologize. I know I missed a meeting earlier in the year. Was there a scope of work or something put out for the CCP project and kind of what when you say community engagement, what that means? Because I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, Rob, it was part of the RFP that was included in the one that we put out for general consulting, in which we were able to identify Sean's shop, and Sean subcontracted with CCP.
Okay, thank you for that. I was not aware of that. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks everybody. If there aren't any further questions on the report back from Hatch Forum and CCP, we'll move on. Sean and Michael, thank you both very much.
Great, thank you.
So our next agenda item is a presentation from the Western Environmental Law Center. Really appreciate having them on the line today. Their presentation is entitled "Putting New Mexico Development Finance to Work for a Sustainable Economy." Before we jump into that presentation, I wanted to say that I am I'm traveling to Denver today, so I have to catch a flight. And so Joe Little, one of our committee members, has graciously offered to take over chair responsibilities moving forward. I will still be on the line, but really appreciate Joe being willing to step in as chairing the meeting for the rest of the time that we have together. And without further ado, I want to invite Tom Singer from WELC to begin the presentation, and please introduce yourself and other members of your team.
Very good, James. Thank you. Yes, I'm Tom Singer. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor with the Western Environmental Law Center, and I'm joined by Rose Rushing and Morgan O'Grady. WELC, I didn't prepare for the little blurb about WELC, but we are an a public interest environmental law firm operating around the West, and we do a lot of work in New Mexico on fossil fuel, renewable energy, climate issues. And I see that the agenda goes to 4:30, so I don't think we've got a time issue. And so with that, we can answer questions about who we are and why we're here, I guess at the end of the presentation. I wasn't prepared for that, but perhaps Rose, am I able to share? I guess I should just find out.
Oh, looks like you're sharing. I think we're good, Tom.
So Rose, we can just go and if you give me the next screen, please, I'll do that.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you to the SEAC. And I learned from many things from the last presentation, but one of them was that you say SEAC instead of SEAC, which is what I've been saying. So thank you all so much for having us here to present today. In general, oh, and I'm an attorney at Welk. I live in Farmington for context. I lived in Farmington for a couple of years. So these kind of just transition issues are very close to my heart as someone who lives in the Four Corners and in the San Juan Basin. We have Morgan O'Grady, who's a wonderful consultant with Welk, and Tom is a policy advisor. So you could go on to the next slide, Tom, thanks. The goal of our presentation today is to inform the SEAC about the state development finance landscape and the investment dollars that are available to implement the plan, as well as the role that the SEAC can play in setting the investment policy for these programs. So this would be policies that affect what happens on the ground in your communities. So just kind of as a general overview, we know that there is, as we're all here to sort of figure out how we're going to navigate this transition away from fossil fuel development, or, you know, what are the technological ways that we as a state are going to be able to pivot away from fossil fuel extraction and use to prevent catastrophic climate change in a way that supports our communities that are historically dependent on either oil and gas revenue, like Farmington, or communities that have been historically relied upon to do the labor of developing these resources and live within the health and environmental impact zone of that development. We have an amazing opportunity at this particular time to craft policies that embrace equity principles that can move us forward away from fossil fuel development in towards a future where these communities are supported, as opposed to you know, fearing for like economic abandonment as we move forward with this stuff. So we recognize that the statewide EDD economic diversification plan has many dimensions, and that the SEAC is focused specifically on equity and community engagement. So we want to place this focus specifically within the context of the larger diversification challenge and the state's financial investment capacity. So for the last couple of months, maybe 6 months at Welk, we have spent some time researching and developing kind of a roadmap of what the financial programs that are currently available in the state to fund transition efforts, whether that be like individual green sort of corporations or sort of larger programs. And that's why we're so pleased to be here today to talk about what we've figured out and to continue hopefully to work with you guys in any capacity that would be helpful. We're sort of hoping that this could just be like an introduction to what we've been looking into. So now I'll read off the slide now that I've done blathering for 5 minutes. So in general, the goals of the Set Force and the SEAC, as you all know, are to diversify the New Mexico economy and tax base, see just transition investment based on environmental justice principles in New Mexico's frontline and rural communities, which I know many people here, myself included, are members of these communities and take that directive very seriously, and to reduce the state's overdependence on volatile fossil fuel revenues, and to kind of, you know, ideally break the boom and bust cycle that prevents us from kind of moving forward on this question. So Tom, you could go to the next slide. So we all know kind of like in this community, in this space, that there have been efforts to promote a just transition for a little while now. So some of the narratives that we've been picking up, some of the patterns at Welk that we've noticed over the years are that the fossil fuel industry is sort of trying to maintain their foothold, understandably, with a couple specific messages that we've heard a lot. Sorry if you heard an air horn. That message, I'm actually like at the beach, so that's the lifeguard. Something bad's happening. But the fossil fuel industry is specifically working to promote a few messages that you might hear and encounter here. Those messages would include renewables and electrification are not enough to support the economy. I know I hear that a lot in Farmington as it relates to the shutdown of the San Juan generating station. That everything kind of bad that happens has to do with the shutdown of the power San Juan generating station, and that doesn't generate. Now we won't have enough power to support the economy, and we won't have enough money going around to support the state. You might also hear fossil fuels are going to be needed for the medium to long term. So basically, there's no point in trying to come up with a speedy and just transition. Instead, we're going to need to continue to rely on fossil fuels for the near and long-term future. And therefore, to meet our climate goals, governments must invest heavily to reduce the carbon footprint of fossil fuel production and use. Stuff like carbon negative shot, hydrogen shot, and New Mexico hydrogen hub proposals that actually require the continued production and development of fossil fuels. And these lead to false promises, as we call them here in the slide. They might be called false solutions by other groups. The idea that fossil fuels can be clean and net zero, sort of asking the state to invest in technologies that might not scientifically be as reliable as the renewables that we know are functional and are cost effective, because that state investment would be in one way or another sort of directed towards the continuation of fossil fuels. Stuff like carbon sequestration and storage, responsibly sourced natural gas, gas-based blue hydrogen. These ideas promote sort of the general narrative that low or no carbon life cycle greenhouse gas fossil fuels can still power New Mexico's economy for the foreseeable future. Our understanding at WELC is that the scientific consensus is that that's not where we should be going. That's not a sustainable way to develop the economy in a way that promotes a just transition. So those are sort of the narratives that we've been hearing. That's the reason why we're giving this presentation. And yeah, Tom, you could sort of take us into some more specifics now.
Thanks. And it's also the commercial track record of these technologies. It's not just their scientific viability, but they have failed in the marketplace to date, and we don't see them being ready enough for the kind of transition that SB 112 and your work is oriented towards. I don't know how. There we go. I need to move everybody's picture so I can read the slides. So, what lies ahead? What's the environment that you all are going to be working in when the legislature convenes next winter and beyond? I think everybody's aware the state is absolutely awash in oil money, and it may be that way for quite a while. Significant amounts of state revenues have been and likely will be proposed and appropriated for economic development and economic diversification. And we've seen that the fossil fuel industry is looking to take advantage of these state and federal programs, especially for things like hydrogen and carbon and capture and storage. And the question is, how does that fit with the diversification mandate of the set force? I don't even need to say anything about the slide. You all know it well. There are 9 sectors that the statewide strategic plan has identified as high growth. And really the bottom line, the message of our presentation is we want state agencies to focus on these sectors and not get hijacked. And we'd like to work with the SEAC to spread that message and to work towards that goal. So how can the SEAC help ensure that economic development dollars go to these targeted sectors that are now dependent on fossil fuels? That's kind of the question that we're posing to you. And just a little context, many of you are probably familiar with this. In the 2020 New Mexico legislative session, the governor's original budget bill and the legislature's bills included major proposed special appropriation, $150 million for the hydrogen hub project. It was defeated lots of groups that thought this was not the way the state ought to go. The appropriation was whittled down to 70 million. It still couldn't pass. Since then, the governor issued an executive order that hardwires New Mexico's pursuit of the Department of Energy hydrogen hub financed money, blue hydrogen, within the strategic plan, sustainable and green energy sector. So that's kind of like uranium, that was plugged in there because it's a policy priority. The governor's entirely welcome and has the authority and the right to do that. But what are the implications for the development dollars, the economic development dollars? And again, under the DOE rules, hub development costs are going to require a 50-state match. So if you're talking about billion-dollar projects, you're talking about a lot of money. A couple of things in the governor's executive order 13 I wanted you to be aware of. And so the governor said, now therefore I order and direct, and I'm just going to read these slowly, read along with me if you'd like, that all state executive agencies shall ensure that state and federal funding that they administer individually supports the development of the clean and zero carbon hydrogen economy to the greatest extent possible and consistent with applicable laws. That typo and extend, I hope is in her executive order, not me. Next is that the development department and other agencies shall 1 week prior to the start of the 23 session provide recommendations to the governor on additional programs or incentives that will contribute to the development of a hydrogen industry in New Mexico. And further, that EDD shall include hydrogen in the state's key economic sectors, support the development of clean and zero carbon hydrogen production, and review with support from other members of its state executive agencies, its existing programs and authorities to identify those that can be used to support the economic development of an environmentally responsible hydrogen sector. So what state, the main information in our presentation is here to come with Morgan. What state economic development finance tools are out there? What's available to advance hydrogen hubs, other notions of economic diversification, the energy transition? And I might pause and just say that the hydrogen that the governor and the legislature have been talking about is made from natural gas. It is a fossil fuel. It's a natural gas-based industry. There is water-based hydrogen, which is called green hydrogen. That has a longer timeline because it's far more expensive and far less developed right now than this blue natural gas-based hydrogen. So, what we're worried about is the state going all in on blue hydrogen and basically maintaining its dependence on natural gas and fossil fuels. So Morgan, to you.
Great, thanks. So I'll walk you guys through a handful of funding streams that we found and were particularly interested in. All of them are focused on economic development. So the first fund is the Local Economic Development Assistance Program, or LEDA, and this is administered by NMEDD. Its purpose, as is the purpose for most of the funding streams that we're going to be speaking about today, is economic development. In this year, the state legislature appropriated $50 million for LEDA grants, and you'll see a bullet on the slide talking about Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham's announcement of a $10 million LEDA loan to Universal Hydrogen. So that gives you kind of a sense of the kind of money that may go towards hydrogen from this economic development money. The pipeline currently for LEDA projects includes projects in carbon capture, clean gas refining, methane detection, petrochemicals, and oil extraction. Although LEDA grants have previously gone to renewable energy projects like solar, there are no projects currently in the pipeline for renewable storage or transmission. In the next slide, thanks, Tom. We have the Opportunity Enterprise Revolving Fund. This is administered again by NMEDD. It was established this year in 2022, and in its first year, the legislature appropriated $70 million to it. Note that this program has a clause, you'll see there in the second bullet, that essentially transforms loans to grants if the loan contract terms are met. The act also established a board to make rules to establish economic development goals for the state and loan eligibility criteria. For the next slide, we have the.
I'm going to pause, interrupt you there for a
Okay.
second. And I want to just reiterate that the statute requires this board to establish economic goals for the state. And I'm sure Secretary Keys and others at EDD will figure out how to align that board's rulemaking process with the strategic plan. But this is an element that we see it could be quite important for people to pay attention to.
Thanks, Tom. So for the next slide, we have the New Mexico Venture Capital Fund. This is administered by the New Mexico Finance Authority. And like the last fund, this was established this year in 2022. In its first year, the legislature appropriated $35 million to it. The act establishing this program also included a clause enabling the NMFA to make rules regarding the terms and conditions for investments. So this likely includes lengths, interest rates, etc. It may also include eligibility requirements. In other words, who is eligible for these types of loans. Or yeah, loans.
Not loans.
Grant.
Equity investments.
Thank
We're
you.
good.
So for the next one, we have the New Mexico Private Equity Investment Program. This is administered by the New Mexico State Investment Council, or the SEAC. And the purpose of this fund, in essence, is to enhance the economic development objectives of New Mexico. State law allows the SEAC to use up to 11% of the severance tax permanent fund to capitalize this fund. And the severance tax permanent fund currently sits at about 6.3 billion. So that's up to 660 million. Current investments in this program total roughly 400 million. So you'll note there's about 200 million there that looks to be unallocated. Current investments include startup and early stage firms in healthcare, software, aviation, technology, and energy. And for our last fund that we'll be talking to you about today, there's the New Mexico Catalyst Fund. This is established, or this is administered again by the SEAC as the last fund that we discussed. And it's another source of funding for venture investments, the other being the new venture capital fund that we discussed a moment ago. In terms of capitalization, there's limited information publicly available. So we really looked, there's little that we can find, but we believe that it's capitalized at 105 million. The fund also appears to be a subset of the fund mentioned on the last slide, the Private Equity Investment Program. But again, we're not completely confident because there's limited information available. And this fund includes investments in 6 New Mexico venture capital funds. So with this, I'm going to hand it back to Rose to talk about what's coming next in New Mexico.
Thanks, Morgan. So I think probably, as we all know, basically the state of New Mexico will be awash in these oil and gas related revenues in the next year. Just for some numbers, the New Mexico Tax and Revenue Department reports that oil and gas revenues from January through April more than doubled. From $782 million in 2021, which was itself a record year, to $1.7 billion in 2022. Legislative Finance Committee economists estimate the oil and gas revenues of over $5.2 billion for fiscal year 2023, which is roughly $1 billion more than last year. And the appropriators of these funds, including those in the legislature, are already pondering what to do with this massive surplus. So we can anticipate that there will be further an increased economic development, finance and diversification funding and funding opportunities. And so you could do the next slide, Tom. Thank you. Basically, we anticipate, based on what's happened so far, that fossil fuel and other non-target sectors, because thankfully the Economic Development Department has already sort of figured out these 9 sectors that New Mexico really has an opportunity to invest in at this time, to start generating replacement revenue in time to have a stable economy by when we wind down fossil fuel production. But we anticipate that, again, fossil fuel and non-target sectors will fill sort of this finance void if policies are not in place, hopefully soon, to direct the funds to these 9 sectors that were targeted by the strategic plan. Because currently the programs that Morgan outlined just don't necessarily have those guardrails in place to prevent the funds from being diverted to fossil fuel projects. So this could include more universal hydrogen type projects and biotechs. And so what can we do at this time? SEAC has an opportunity to encourage the Economic Development Department, set forth, and the legislature to establish policies to implement the economic diversification plan and adhere to environmental justice principles. And I know specifically that's what SEAC has been tasked with. And to specifically shape what these policies look like, how they'll play out in our communities, and to make sure that with this boon of revenue that we're anticipating for the next year, actual just transition opportunities occur on the ground in the communities that we're so familiar with, as opposed to being diverted away. So that is what we've been working on at WELC. We hope that SEAC can keep these principles in mind as they update their priority drafts. And we're open to questions now or at any time about sort of these funding streams, what we think is going to happen, and what our understanding of the authorities are on these kind of things. So thank you all so much for being available, for listening to our presentation. And I believe that we are open to questions now.
I want to thank the Law Center for their presentation. So does anybody have any questions of the group? Go ahead, Samantha.
Hi, here is CCP. I'm the Clean Energy Equity Fellow. I do have a question about if they've talked a little bit about like the water consumption for the hydrogen hub, because we've been in a drought. So that was just like a concern that I had.
Yeah, I mean, yes, green hydrogen or electrolytic hydrogen made from water is the only way New Mexico could play in that sector, we think, is using the saline aquifers, the saltwater aquifers, brackish aquifers underground all over New Mexico. They're also being targeted as carbon sinks for fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions capture and storage to be stored in those aquifers. And we're not sure yet. We're learning the science as to whether those uses are compatible. As far as blue hydrogen, natural gas-based hydrogen, I think we're really talking about cooling water. I'm sure there's water consumption involved in those technologies of making the hydrogen and then generating electricity with the hydrogen. But we don't know about that, but we can put you in touch with people who do.
I just want to add to that really quickly, if I may, that I haven't seen any conclusive numbers, but I have seen some reports indicating that the water consumption over the life cycle of hydrogens combined with fossil fuel extraction combined with blue hydrogen production may end up being comparable to the water consumption of green hydrogen, which does not use fossil fuels and instead uses water. Either way, as you alluded to, we're very short on water in our state. And as Tom mentioned, there may be some avenues to use saline water for green hydrogen here, but that is a new technology too, and it would require desalination or some other purification process. So a lot of unknowns.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Jonathan?
Good afternoon. Thank you. Appreciate the presentation, the information being provided. I'm from northwestern New Mexico, not too far from Farmington. So, the information that's provided, I think, is very, very important. And, with the Navajo communities out here, we have approximately 50, 56 here in New Mexico. And of those Navajo communities, 31 are located within the checkerboard area. And when we talk about the resource extraction, the oil and gas and other issues, we are on the front lines. And when we talk about the state of New Mexico either reinvesting or getting dollars back to the community, it's these communities that often miss out because there's a misunderstanding in terms of jurisdiction. These 31 communities are looked at as, being under the umbrella of the Navajo Nation government. When in reality, because of the checkerboard situation, there are certain issues that come up and certain restrictions that we are within our own tribal government. And that in turn develops problems in terms of trying to go after financial resources, whether that be investing in community projects or economic development opportunities. And so we also have the New Mexico State Highway 371 that goes through this area. And some of the questions that have come up that I've seen within the community, and this goes back to, I guess, the strategic plan, is the communication. Communication between the state and the local communities is not there, because we have had discussions with the issue with hydrogen, and nobody in the communities are really knowledgeable about the situation. We're asked to, put in our position a resolution at the community level, and we really don't have that type of knowledge here. Now, when we talk about reinvesting or putting the dollars back into the communities, we also have the economic corridors like 371, Highway 371 that I mentioned. There's really no efforts to seek improvement or collaborate with the local communities on how to develop maybe local or regional economic development hubs within these communities. And so, we end up losing a lot of opportunities that could come through the community. But I do appreciate this information, and I'm wondering if I could get a copy of the presentation. It's really good, and I do appreciate it and the work that you all put in to present today. Yeah, thank you.
If I know that wasn't really a question, but if I could sort of give you a little anecdote and sort of a sense of what WELC's role is, what we like, what we're grateful to be able to do. The Energy Transition Act had roughly $20 million in energy transition funding to go to about 12 million to about 12 million to Workforce Solutions, 6 million to EDD, and two plus to Indian Affairs. And the general economic development purposes for the ETA money were spelled out in the law, and advisory committees were set up, et cetera, et cetera. And then the agencies put out a request for information for members of the communities to send into the agencies, what would you like to see done with this money? And to our alarm, there were lots of fossil fuel related proposals out there suggesting San Juan College wanted to certify clean natural gas certifiers in some of the hydrogen projects. And they're perfectly entitled to do that. But we got worried, where is this money going to go? And just for our own bona fides, I guess, we represented several community groups in the Four Corners in the merger case between Alvin Grid and PNM, and whatever you think about that merger, we were able to negotiate in the settlement agreement a commitment by this company of shareholder money of $12.5 million to our clients to allocate to the communities. So there, it's about as direct, control as you can get from these communities to make sure that the money goes to the kind of projects that I think you were talking about. So this is a tough thing, but this whole justice dimension of getting these community voices heard and the dollars flowing to the priorities of the communities, that's kind of what this is all about. Thank you.
Thanks. Rob?
Sorry, my mouse is not cooperating. It was hard to get to that mute button. Thank you, and thanks for being here. You know, I too come from and born and raised in an impacted community. I grew up in Lovington, New Mexico, in the middle of the Permian Basin. And I know the importance of the oil and gas industry for that community. I also know that we've got about a decade in this state to transfer off of our reliance on oil and gas, to diversify our economy and make those investments before technology and policy catches up with that revenue stream. And it starts to diminish greatly, to a degree that if we do not make that successful transition, we will condemn the next 2 generations of New Mexicans to a level of poverty the US has not seen.
Wow.
I believe that to my core. With that said, I have a problem with the presentation today. One, it was brought to us by an activist organization. You know, there was a statement made that renewable energy is more reliable than carbon-based fuels. That is wrong.
And here I just want to interject really quickly, and I appreciate your comments, Rob. And just to remind everybody, committee members included, to treat both the presenters and each one another with respect. So I appreciate the comments. Please proceed.
I will proceed. I have problems with the way the presentation was put together, the advocacy that was part of it. I think it provides a one-sided perspective as it relates to hydrogen and a variety of other things. But there were some things that were just frankly incorrect in my perspective, in my experience working in the industry, or the energy industry. And so I think we have to have our discussions based more around factual data versus policy advocacy. And so I am concerned that this was one of the first presentations we've had as a group in this type of discussion, where it was primarily an advocacy discussion. So, there were a variety of places where, again, I have concerns about the accuracy or the completeness of the message. And I think there's good arguments to be made that reducing carbon intensity is very important. You brought up universal hydrogen. Decarbonizing the aerospace and industry is incredibly challenging. And if we can do that through the use of hydrogen, I think a lot of people would think that is, and start to decarbonize it. Maybe you don't get to 100%, but there's value in it. And there's also 1,000 construction jobs, 500 full-time jobs, and $250 million of investment that comes to New Mexico that creates good paying jobs, that diversifies our economy. So while the intent of this entity is designed to promote diversification away from that deeper reliance on kind of just the strict oil and gas industry, I am concerned about the nature of this discussion today. I'll just leave it at that.
James, are you still on?
I am, but please, you are chairing the meeting now, Joe. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank the Law Center for making their presentation, and also appreciate the comments from Mr. Black or any other members on the committee. Are there any further questions or anything from the members before we turn it over to general comment? If not, then I'll move on to the agenda and take public comments. Are there any public comments or anybody in the audience who wants to make a comment? Going once, going twice. Okay, all right, that's fine. Well, thank everybody for being here and the various presentations, and I hope that's quite a bit of information we've gotten, and I think we need to check through that, see where we are, and get ready for the next meeting, I guess. James, are there any last things you want to say?
No, I think as chair, you can entertain a motion to close meeting.
Okay. Anybody, do I hear a motion to close?
So moved. This is Rob.
This is
Second.
sorry, second.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you guys for all being here. We'll see you the next meeting. Take care.